Hi, it's Jamie Dockery with UK Extension, and we're talking houseplants. So let's talk about easy houseplants, which are all the rage right now. I'm really excited that we're having a rebirth, if you will, of houseplant popularity. I love that so many of my younger friends are excited about houseplants. It's almost like being in the 70s again when everybody had the wandering Jews and stuff everywhere. It was a fun time. So we're talking Hoya. That's a strange plant. Many of you may not even be aware of it. It is sometimes commonly known as wax plant because these leaves are so thick and shiny, it looks like it's almost made out of wax. So these are vining plants that come from drier areas. They would climb trees and things, and they're also known, I think wax flower is actually the term. The blooms on these would remind you of a giant fragrant viburnum bloom. Certain ones smell more like chocolate and things, and they're very fragrant in the early evenings. So you only get flowers if you get really strong light. Hoyas don't necessarily need full direct hot sun, but really bright light is critical, and they can probably take a little morning sun. Why I like Hoyas so much? Because they're not the flashiest, showiest plant around by any stretch, but they're very interesting, and they're also incredibly durable. It is really hard to do damage to a Hoya unless you overwater. Hoyas like to dry out well between waterings, and they don't like to stay wet. These thick fleshy leaves store water, as do the fleshy stems, so they're almost succulent-like in that regard. There's different lengths of vines, different types of things, and I'll talk about some of my favorites that I have here. And many of these are small specimens, except for this thing. This was a gift as a rooted cutting from my dear friend Susan Grant, who I met through our programs here. She shared this with me a number of years ago, and it was my first Hoya. I'd avoided them, didn't like them, but I respect her so much. I kept it, grew it, and I have come to love this. This is one of my favorite plants. Now, this is wrapped around a topiary form, because when I started getting all these long vines, don't be alarmed by this. The leaves form after the long vine, and it will fill out. But once it started to grow and was so easy, I was so impressed with it, I got really excited, and I started wrapping and wrapping. So this is on some rebar frame that I made, just because this is maybe 6 or 8, maybe even 10 years old, and I've been wrapping it every summer, and these all go out for the summer. So keep them on the dry side. The leaves are, most varieties, very shiny. These are poor examples. Please forgive my sad little rooted cuttings here. But there are narrow leaf varieties. Some people call these green bean Hoyas. You can also find this one with yellow centers. This is really, I don't know if it'll pick it up on the camera, but it's really a medium green with a very dark green edge. And you can find that with a yellow center and an edge. I have a tiny one of those at home, but it was so small it wasn't even worth bringing in. This is another species, and I'm trying to think which species it evades me at the moment. This one has reddish flowers, dark pink flowers. This is a variety with pink stems and beautifully variegated foliage known as Crimson Queen. It also blooms very, very well. I've had this one since, probably early spring, so it's filling out nicely. They bloom best when they are slightly pot-bound. So even though this particular topiary one is massive and the pot seems appropriate, I'm cheating a little bit because it's actually in a pot this size, because they flower best and they dry out quicker if they're in a small pot. This is so top heavy, it got promoted into this other pot just to help it have some more balance and keep it upright. As it grows, I'm going to have to add rocks around this just to anchor it in, or maybe just bump it up to this eventually. I've seen all sorts of neat things, creative things done with Hoyas. I've seen pots attached to old window frames and allowed to climb through the little muntins or the little cross pieces in that old window without the glass. You can grow them up most anything. I've seen people with greenhouses who have them trained over the arches, so there's overhead ones. There's a stink bug I didn't want in here. But a lot of neat things. One of my very favorite ones, and it's extremely slow growing. This is Hindu rope plant, or Hoya Carnosa, and there's several forms of this that dictate the slower growing twisted leaves. I've had this all summer. Quite honestly, it grew about 1 inch. and only this stem. So this is extremely slow, but when you get some long ropes of these cascading out over the pot, it's truly a wonderful, fascinating little plant. Here's a really strange one. I didn't even know about this one. This is Hoya retusus, which is a very narrow foliage variety. So there's a lot of different Hoyas and many more than what you see right here. Fragrant flowers in the summer, provided they get ample light and they're happy, preferably a little pot bound. Keep them in a light potting mix that drains very quickly. And if you're in doubt about watering, don't. They can handle dry far, far more readily than they can overly wet. So make sure you're letting them dry down. I'm coming as I get older to really appreciate these no-care plants. Yes, they're not challenging. People don't backflip over them to the extent they do some of the exotic stuff. But when you are a gardener and you've come to appreciate plants, you really appreciate healthy plants. And I would rather have something slightly more common that looks beautiful all the time than some exotic specimen that's half dead every time you see it. So think about easy. There's nothing wrong with having easy houseplants. And if you're a beginner, Hoya is a wonderful place to start. Keep in mind the vining nature. Some of them grow quickly. This should be wrapped again as we speak, or pruned, one of the two. I think I'm going to turn this one into a Christmas tree this year just for fun. But Hoyas are great plants. Wax plants, they're really kind of hot right now and trending, so you can find weird ones more readily than we have been able to in the past. And there's a ton of mail order sources. There's some greenhouses that specialize in succulents and things because these thick fleshy stems almost qualify them for succulent level care. So Hoyas, if you're not familiar with them, do a little research. Find out how many odd ones there are. Try one and see what you think. I think once it flowers, you smell that fragrance, you see how cool those flowers are, how long they last, and the neat foliage, you'll be a Hoya fan too.